Oh, really?
We play both.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that's our benefit. It's great.
I think sometimes it was so direction.
Yeah.
Because someone had that conversation to carry along, and we just, there's some of my predecessors in COVID, it seemed,
Just from the neighbors and everything like that.
yeah. So, like this afternoon,
That's great.
You will always be.
No, he said it was good.
Both sides.
Stand on one foot and grab one.
What she's doing is doing the lending.
I was in there, yes, I was on the first one, or 2 days ago, I mean, I was on the first one, and I was typing out a question, and it ended right when the second.
Good. That's what somebody said. She said, "I'm just going to carry your camera right on." So I do. That's not really like last year. It used to be on my it's also like you're doing some good stuff with like the repeaters.
Yeah, we've done this now, we actually process.
Oh my God.
And then she didn't really.
No, he's created when he brings out, video files. It's amazing, these multi-path. Put it on a tower with 1,400 vendors on the channel. Yeah, the 250. Yeah, 12. We put it on a tower that's They just got their final round. Everybody else was testing. We've first class. It's in Denison right now. Get ready to deploy. Yeah, now, and later this year, there's nothing, and then you go, here you are.
So it's not easy. So
what was the one like again? Did we just not push the card?
I think we talked a little bit about this. Hours or something. Sometimes.
Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming this morning. My name is Jeanette Wurzbicki. I'm the Executive Director of the Ohio Mid-Eastern Governments Association. And following the pandemic, we received funding from the U.S. Economic Development Administration to help our region to economically recover from the pandemic. One of the main issues that arose during the pandemic, as I'm sure you're all familiar with, was the fact that much of our region, the Appalachian region of Ohio, lacked access to reliable, high-speed broadband. So with money that we received from the EDA, the Economic Development Administration, we retained Reid Consulting to do a region-wide broadband feasibility study. And so Tom Reid and Sean O'Malley have been working extremely hard during the past year, almost, to put together a study for our region. And we're currently doing outreach meetings or stakeholder meetings in each one of our counties to present kind of some of the results, to work with our stakeholders to identify priority areas to be served, funding to meet those needs. As an example, we recently worked with Carroll County on an ARC power application to extend broadband into some of their priority areas that are not currently served. So with that, I'd like to introduce Sean O'Malley from Reid Consulting. For some of you that have been to several of our other meetings, part of the introductory material may be a little bit familiar to you, but then Sean's going to get into the specifics for Tuscarawas County. We really want your input. This meeting is also being live streamed on Facebook, and we will be putting the recording on YouTube following the meeting. So we appreciate everyone's time this morning and appreciate your input. So thank you for coming.
Thanks, Jeanette.
So this really is about, well, before I start, I do want to acknowledge, as Jeanette said, the funding for this, Omega's been providing the prime funding for this. We're also working with the neighboring development districts, Buckeye Hills, Ohio Valley Regional Development Commission, and Eastgate. We've got quite a few other funding partners across the state as well. Without these folks, this could not happen. We're really grateful for that. This really is a matter of positioning our region for the win. I apologize if there are any Steelers or Browns fans in here. Joey Burrow is a hometown boy for us. Went to high school with my kids, so I feel I can use him as an example. But to make this happen, we need to identify where the problems are and prioritize which ones we want to work on. We need to find funding for them and secure funding. And we need to track that funding and enforce it, make sure it actually happens. Some of the past programs at the federal level were not so good about tracking and enforcing. I'd like to start at the state level here. It's a pretty stark picture. All of that dark red and orange is essentially unserved according to the FCC. So anything below 25 megabits down, 3 megabits up, they say you don't really have broadband. And then by the new Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, anything below 120 is considered underserved. So all of the yellow and the light green also becomes eligible for funding at that point. It's just those tiny dark green patches that you see. And at this resolution, you can pretty much only see them in the cities. There are handfuls of those in the smaller cities and towns as well, but you can't see it at this resolution, but it is still a pretty wide extent. This is based on partially over 9 million consumer-initiated speed tests. So if you go on Google and just Google speed test, you're probably going to get the company called Ookla, their tool. When you run that, they keep track of that speed test result you did, and the state was very smart. They licensed 1.5 years worth of that data. So we were able to essentially plot all of the census plots across the state to show how fast the speeds really were, and then combine that with existing federal data. We would like to see more speed tests still. Folks can go to connectingappalachia.org for the instructions. This is pretty simple on how to do it. So by the numbers, we will look at these unserved areas. So you're looking at about 2/3 of the state, about 800,000 households do not have basic broadband according to FCC minimums. The FCC claims that it's only 200,000. They have since walked that back. They've admitted that their maps are inaccurate and that they didn't fully describe the problem. Microsoft on the high end thinks there's about 2 million unserved households in the state. So the problem really comes down to population density. When you're in a city, you've got plenty of customers available for internet providers, even competing providers, so that it's worth their while to invest in the cabling infrastructure like fiber or copper to be able to actually serve that area. As an example, Columbus is 1,500 households per square mile. Even when you get down to a smaller city like McConnellsville, it's still pushing 500 per square mile, and that's enough market share to be able to make back your investment. It's when you get down into what we call the rural expanse, where you're less than 2% the density of the city. All of Mix County is only 1.7% of Columbus, 26 households per square mile. And some of the smaller townships, the ones here I've got are still above 10, but we've got a few that are below 10 households per square mile. And at that level, you're not going to get a for-profit company be able to invest and make the money back. We just aren't enough subscribers. It's been a century now, but this is not a new issue. The government has recognized it. I like this line from the Communications Act back in the Depression era. All people in the United States shall have access to rapid, efficient, nationwide
nationwide communication service with adequate facilities and reasonable charges. They were talking about phone lines back then, but that sentence can apply perfectly to broadband. And in fact, since 1990, the FCC has given $100 billion to the big telecommunications companies to supposedly fix this problem. Probably noticed you haven't seen much change on the ground. I liken the problem like to use a road maintenance metaphor here. So if you could maintain your roads for a couple of years, you're going to get some big old potholes, like some car swallowers. If you quit maintaining the roads for a couple of decades, you're going to be back to like a mountain bike path. You're not going to be able to drive on it anymore unless you have a Jeep. And that's essentially the problem in our region, in the rural areas. Much of that broadband is being carried on the copper cables that were installed with that Communications Act money back in the 50s. So we're talking half a century old. Copper's a fine technology. It's starting to show its age now, like it can't handle the really high speeds, but if it's in good shape, it still does pretty good. But that stuff hasn't been touched for half a century. Basically, those companies put it in, they maintained it for 2 or 3 decades while there were a lot of landline phone customers, and then when cell phones came along and landlines started dropping off, they just stopped maintaining it because they didn't see it worth the money. So those things have essentially been abandoned. They don't work well anymore. If you still have a landline, if you're out in a rural area, you may not even have good service there, let alone broadband. To stick with the road metaphor for a minute, specs matter. If you're going to build a highway with federal funding, you end up, if you printed it out, the specs would be like this thick. Like they're telling you, they have to tell you everything you have to do, all the different layers you have to put down, what kind of materials they can be, how they're bound together. All of that stuff is specified, and you have to meet that if you're going to get funding for it. Broadband doesn't have those kind of specifications on it. Essentially, they just say meet the speed. They don't care how you do it. They don't care if it holds up 5 years from now or not. And that can be a problem. To give you some perspective on why, the web was invented basically in 1990, and pretty much since then, every 10 years, bandwidth demands have gone up by tenfold. So you started out at about 100K or so back in the 90s, and then by 2000, if you were in a well-served area, you could expect to get a megabit down. By 2010, back when Zoom first came online as a company, it was up to 10 megabits per second. That FCC standard that we're talking about now for minimum broadband, 25 megabits, that was relevant in 2012. That was what a well-served household had back then. Right now, well-served areas typically get about 100 megabits down. Where are we headed from there? Who knows, but I'm pretty sure this trend is going to continue. We're already seeing a lot of augmented reality. We all know that like work from home, remote education, telehealth, they're not going away. Like the pandemic changed the way we look at our economy. That stuff is here to stay. I'm already seeing a lot of immersive VR education happening. A lot of police forces use that to do scenarios, and we'll have headsets on, and you're basically put into the middle of the experience. So probably that trend's going to continue. In terms of keeping up with that, the traditional existing technologies, DSL, which is the phone line-based stuff, fixed wireless with one caveat that I was talking to the SmartWay guys who are here today, that there is a new technology on the horizon that will help with this. And satellite also, they're all average about 100 megabits right now. Cable companies, the cable modems, they're typically around 1 gigabit per second. I've seen now some of the providers are starting to offer like 2 gig plans, but their upload speeds are still really limited. They're still down to like 10 or 20 megabits up. Because cable technology, that whole infrastructure was designed for consumption primarily. They assume you're bringing everything down into your home, you're not sending anything back. And of course, we know that's changing now with all the video plans. Fiber optic is the only thing that right now could handle the demand 40 years from now. Up there at 100 gigs, there are 100 gig networks running right now in cities. So the technology is already there. When you're going to plan for this is infrastructure. It's like sewer system. You don't want to go out and have to dig everybody's yards up again 5 years from now because your pipes weren't big enough when you put in a sewer system. So same thing with broadband. You want to be thinking in terms of about 3 decades, maybe 4 decades for the stuff that you install to last. So we recommend starting your horizon around 2025, partly because these are big projects. They're multi-year construction projects to serve a large area. There's also delays with the supply chain right now, and because there's a lot of federal and state money flying around now to do broadband, providers are jumping on the bandwagon and they're putting in orders for fiber so you can factories are starting to have to gear up, and they're gonna have a little bit of lag before they get the fiber out there. Now, you should not ignore the short term, though. There are tons of people who are having lots of pain with no broadband access. So, if you can find ways to get coverage out there quickly, by all means do it. Talk a little bit about fiber here, because I'm going to show a budget sheet later for the county, and I'm going to give you our assumptions. Not all fiber is the same. One thing you have to keep in mind is what it costs to actually just get everything ready to put it in. So typically you have to hang your fiber cables from utility poles in order to serve all the households. Sometimes you can go underground, but in our region, a lot of times the bedrock is really close to the surface, so that can get challenging and get really expensive. It can range on average from about $30,000 to $60,000 a mile, depending on what electric company you're dealing with. Some of the rural co-ops can actually come in below that. We talked to a few in the southern part of the state, and they were able to quote as low as like $13,000 a mile. Then you got to buy the fiber itself. When we did these projections, it was $30,000 to $40,000 a mile for the type of fiber we were specifying. Inflation's going to hit that, so that's probably going to go up. So when I did these projections originally, you were looking at $60,000 to $100,000 a mile. This is high-end fiber. You could run in like rural expanse where there are only 10 or 15 households per square mile. You could build a fiber network out of what they call drop cable, which are the little narrow cables that go typically from a pole to somebody's house. You could build your whole network out of that if you did fat drop cables. They're real lightweight, they're pretty cheap, they're easy to string up. But once you have fiber broadband in an area, the word gets out, two things are going to happen. One, folks are going to stop leaving. Like kids are going to stay when they finish school because they have options to be able to work remotely rather than having to depend on whatever industry might be local. Word also will get out for people who are willing to work remotely, who want to live in an attractive rural area like much of our region is. You will have people coming to the area. When you get more households built, that minimal fiber network isn't going to be able to keep up because it doesn't have enough strands. So we're recommending that when you run all the fiber cables along the roads, use high strand counts. You can have 200, 300, 500 strands in a cable. Get enough to cover all the current households, enough that if the cell companies want to start installing more cell towers, you can lease them technology, you can lease them capacity on those runs, and then also just have room for more houses as people come back to the region. I would also recommend using high quality cable with multi-layers of armor. Squirrels love fiber. Even more so than power lines, maybe because they don't die when they bite into a fiber cable. There are cables that you can get that have like multiple layers of protection. So the squirrels will chew on the insulation, they like that, they chew on it, and then they hit the metal sheath, or like an aramid layer like Kevlar, and they hit that, and they don't like that, and they stop. But still, they broke through the insulation, so then water can get in. Well, there's another layer of insulation underneath that aramid layer, so that the water still doesn't get in and ruin the cable. The real expensive fiber ones don't have that. Once the squirrel bites into it, it might even bite right through the fiber strands, and then you're having to replace that bit. And as I said above, we're assuming you're putting on utility poles. If you go underground, it's probably going to add 10 to 50,000 per mile more for the challenges that you run into with the bedrock. So to give you a sense of why this is a challenge, typical electrical lines set up here. You see these all the time when you're driving around. So up top here, you got your high voltage stuff. You got a transformer that converts it down to the lower level, and then the power gets sent down to the house. This clearance here, they have to maintain a minimum to these communication lines because communication techs are not trained or certified to be able to deal with electrical lines. So you don't want a communication tech messing with something up here because they might get killed. Or you would have to turn off power to the whole region, like the whole neighborhood, to be able to work up there. Then on top of that, you've got a minimum clearance to the ground, and when you add another line, you're going, probably a foot below the existing ones. In flat country, farm country, it's not often too big of a deal, but we have our lovely hills in our region, and a lot of these runs pass over terrain undulations, and you add another line in that communication space, and you're no longer far enough off the ground, so you got to go back, put in taller poles so that everything can be raised up higher. Sometimes too, it's the age of the poles. Fiber optic is not heavy, it's not near as heavy as power line, but in the winter, it gets ice on it, and ice gets heavy really quickly. So when the power company does the engineering studies on these to add another line to their poles, they'll find that like sometimes as many as like 1 in 5 poles are old enough that when that ice load builds up, there's a risk they'll snap. So then they have to put a new pole in. And a year and a half ago, we were seeing quotes of like $5,000 a pole. That could change again just because of supply issues. So look at the Omega region here. This zooms in on just the counties. So you're looking at about a third of the households are unserved, and over 3/4 of your populated acreage are unserved. Put an overlay on here. These lines are what we call middle mile fiber. And this particular middle mile, the blue stuff already exists. The pink is stuff that we recommend be built in order to close off these loops like in here, so that you've got redundant pathways to be able to reach in. Tuscarawas is in pretty good condition as far as existing middle mile goes. And for those of you who don't know that term, basically to get to the internet, you've got these big cross-country pipelines that are handling data from big cities, and that's essentially what you call the internet. And then you've got your internet provider's offices, and you've got all the homes. You need to be able to get from the internet to the internet provider's office, and then out into the communities where you're going to serve. So the middle mile is essentially a carrier between the local office and the communities. Without middle mile, you can't do what they call the last mile, which is all of the lines that actually run down the roads to the individual houses and all the drop cables. Here's a simpler version of the unserved area, all in one color, just to kind of give you a feel for what it looks like in the region. This dark blue is some federal funding from a program called the Rural Digital Opportunity Fund, or RDOF for short. Government, we love acronyms, so folks call it RDOF. Charter Communications won a decent chunk of the unserved territory, especially in the southern part of Tuscarawas. Initially, we were concerned that they wouldn't do the work. This program has a lot of flaws in it. For one thing, it has a timeline of 10 years. So it would take a really long time to figure out if they actually even served anything. And there are almost no penalties for not finishing things. There are some, but they're low enough that it actually would probably fit within a company's operating budget to just pay the penalty rather than serve the really expensive locations. But since then, Charter has started work in Guernsey on their RDOF areas, even though they hadn't at that point actually been authorized to get the money from the FCC yet. So we're pretty optimistic about them at this point, though as the prices go up, still gotta be careful. The state House Bill 2 money, none got awarded in Tuscarawas County this time around. There will be another round though, at least one more. There's a lot more money coming down, so there are still opportunities there. We'll break down, as you can see, there were no providers awarded in Tuscarawas. So next steps on this, figure out where you want to focus on to get money in, prioritize those areas and look for ways to fund them. FCC has a bunch of money. First round of RDOF, they've been pretty slow to authorize that money, but some of it is starting to come out now. We're hearing that some of that, with some of the companies, they may back off and like redo the program and redistribute the money again. They also have a rural 5G fund that's designed, you could use that to build fiber to support cell towers. USDA is in the broadband business, so is the Treasury Department. Appalachian Regional Commission has a couple of grant programs that can be used for broadband. I'll talk about one of those here in a moment from another county. Broadband Ohio, which is the state or agency that's managing all the House Bill 2 funds, great agency. I'm really impressed with them. I've never seen a government agency act so quickly and so effectively. Like, House Bill 2 got passed. 2 weeks later, Peter Voderberg's crew had that office up and running, their website was fully functional, and they were taking applications for the grants. They have stuck to all their deadlines. They have been pushing the providers who applied throughout to stick to things, to keep moving. And they also are being really good about holding them accountable. You have to submit a list of addresses you're going to serve, and then they're going to come back later and then look at them and say, did you serve them? Rather than just say, oh, there's one house in this census block, I guess you served it. The NTIA is going to be handling the majority of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act money. That's probably going to be $1 to $1.5 billion for Ohio. Treasury's got $270 million right now. They wind up with more. All of that's going to go through Broadband Ohio. So again, I feel that's a good sign. They've done a good job managing the funds they already have. So there will be additional rounds with that. So here's a couple of examples. Fixed wireless is a great way to get things up quickly. Coshocton County used a bunch of their ARPA money, which is the money that the feds gave townships and counties for COVID relief, and one of the things in that money was that you could use it for broadband. That was considered infrastructure. So they contributed $5 million and put out a bid, and this company called Ohio TT came in and said, we'll put up 11 new towers and attach antennas to 10 more existing structures. And they are stating that they should be able to serve at varying speeds, 15,000 households approximately. That map on there shows their coverage. So you can see, like up on top of the ridges, you're gonna get faster speeds. When you get down to the hollers, the lighter green is slower speeds. Carroll County is taking a different approach. They took their ARPA funds, they took a little over $1 million of their ARPA funds and used that as a match to apply for an Appalachian Regional Commission power grant. So they put out an RFP and they said, we're looking for an internet provider to partner with us. Charter ended up winning that RFP and they're gonna do fiber. So they're gonna put in 86 miles of fiber, 384 houses, 53 businesses in those regions that are highlighted on Carroll County there. Charter's gonna kick in $874,000. Carroll's kicking in $1.1 million. When you add it all up, they're basically going 50-50 with ARC to do a $4 million grant to bring this coverage in. I want to zoom in now on Tuscarawas County, and the document I'm going to show here in the printout that you picked up today, you can get online versions of those from either the Omega District's website, omegadistrict.org, or you can go to connectingappalachian.org. Okay, so this one has got the detailed speed summary. The first page in this for the county shows where your coverage is lacking. You've got about a third of your households that don't have FCC minimum broadband, just under 8,000. It's almost 80% of your populated acreage. So the good service is very much concentrated in here, the Philadelphia, Dover area. And again, dark red is the worst, green is the best. To take a different look at this, we can focus on it from a business standpoint. Omega obtained the Dun & Bradstreet data for us for all the businesses in the county. So essentially we have a list of where they're all located, how many employees they have, and what industry sector they're in. The data's not perfect. Sometimes you get a business that went out of, that stopped operating like a year before, but they're still in the report. But it's one of the better sources for business data. So then we plotted all of those points on the map. That's the blue dots are. And then we adjusted the dot size based on what we thought the broadband demand would be from that business. So if you have more employees, you'll have more demand. If you're in a high demand sector, you'll also have more demand. So you could have a construction contractor or an excavation contractor that's got 50 employees. You could also have a healthcare clinic that has 50 employees. The healthcare clinic, you're gonna have most of those employees are probably going around all day with iPads in their hands doing patient charts and things, and they're constantly communicating with the cloud. They're going to consume a whole lot of broadband. A lot of like the radiology stuff often happens now over the internet. The construction company's still going to need broadband. It's not like they don't need it, but they've probably got 2 or 3 employees in their home office, and the other 47 of them are out on job sites working during the day. So they're going to be a lower demand. So we adjusted the dot size based on that. You can see you've got a really high concentration of businesses in your well-served areas, of course, but then there are also sectors where you've got businesses out here in rural areas that do not have good broadband. So you can use this map to help prioritize where you want to focus on trying to get more funding. You can combine it. So then we've got unserved roads here. Oh, by the way, again, the orange color is all the unserved area, and then all the other served areas we just made white, so it'd be easy to look at. So this one's got this is the middle mile fiber in that dark blue, and then all of these light blue lines are all of the roads that pass through unserved areas. The reason we mapped this is to make it easier to figure out where fiber would go, because usually you run fiber along roads. Sometimes power companies, every now and then, they'll have a pole run that goes up over a ridge to get from one holler to the next. But for the most part, they follow the roads. And from the utilities we've talked to, when they go through and update their grids, they're often replacing those runs that just go through unpopulated areas with things that will follow roads. So that's a really clean way to estimate how much fiber you would need. So if you were gonna do all of the unserved territory in Tuscarawas, you're looking at 932 miles of fiber. So here's the budget figures for that. And again, this is a robust fiber network that's got more capacity than you need right now, and it's assuming fiber to everyone. You're looking at almost $85 million total cost. You've got a population density of almost 14 households per fiber mile. At that level, we figure an internet provider would be willing to kick in about $1,700 per household of their own money. So that still leaves a funding gap of about $62.5 million. Subsidy comes down to about $4,800 per household. And this is within reason. The Broadband Ohio grants that they awarded, they've been very transparent about who got what and how many addresses they had. And when you do the math, they're perfectly willing to do a subsidy in that range. We've seen some awards that were up around $7,000 or $8,000 a household. So that is doable. Other funding opportunities, like that's a big number. Like, don't feel you need to look just at the county because there are going to be things that address certain areas. So here's a close-up of the RDOF money. Dark blue is charter. They won this big chunk of the county down through here. This lighter blue is Mercury Wireless. This pale grayish blue is a company called Connect Everyone, and there's some tiny dots in pink from a company called LTE Broadband. Charter, we figure, is probably going to do the work. Mercury Wireless, we saw that some of their funding might be starting to get authorized in Ohio, but they're a wireless company. They don't know fiber. They said they would do fiber. They also won this really crazy scattershot territory all across the state. It's just little dots here and there. It's not like, you can see Charter's got these big swaths. Well, this looks kind of like big swaths for Mercury, but if you zoom this out to the whole state, it looks like you shot a piece of paper with a shotgun. It's just, and that's really hard to build a fiber network that way. So we won't be surprised if they back out. Connect Everyone, they won just small parts of Tuscarawas. They won some larger territories in other counties. They're another wireless company that actually specializes in cities. Like, they put an antenna on top of an apartment building or an office building that's not well served, and then they beam connectivity into it and then run cable down through the building. LTE Broadband won just little bitty individual census blocks through most of their territory in the state. They didn't have any large areas. They also got in trouble recently for violating the quiet period during the auction. They were talking with Comcast, I think, and telling them what their bidding strategy was to try to game the system, and they got caught. So they got fined $200,000, I think. But if you look at this, if you assume Charter does this work, you've still got a lot of space from these other providers that probably aren't going to do it, and then you have a lot of unserved territory too. So these were the areas that you want to look at in terms of serving those.
Sean?
Yeah.
I don't know who's taking questions during this, but on that, before I forget.
Yeah.
Charter, you're talking about receive funding from another source. They
Yeah.
did not receive funding from Broadband Ohio.
Not in Tuscarawas. They won a little bit of funding in Harrison, I think.
Yeah. I knew they were going to do some kind of expansion, because I know that I've talked to several people, because when Charter was applying for, or looking at applying for Tuscarawas County, they said that they did not qualify because of not the depressed enough area for specific broadband access. So I just wanted to clarify that so that I was saying the right thing,
Yes.
and that others were hearing me correctly, that Charter looked at applying through Broadband Ohio, but was not able to get funding for Tuscarawas County.
Correct. Yeah, all the charter funding that they did get was federal.
Right.
And it was back in they won it in 2020, and the wheels are grinding slowly, and the money is just now finally getting authorized.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to clarify.
Yeah, and I've been curious what their technology is going to be, because the speeds that they offer still look like cable modem, even though they're calling it fiber. Because they'll say, well, it's a gigabit down, it's 20 megs up. And that fiber is symmetrical. When you do, normally you get up and down.
They're going fiber to the node,
And then they're using their
same
coax.
thing they do everywhere.
Okay, so so it's fiber to the home, but then it's still
Not to the node, to the node.
Oh, just to the node.
And then they're going, which is exactly what they've done.
So basically, they're doing their current technology and just calling it something different.
Stops at 3.1.
Got it. I'm not going to go through I'm not going to read this methodology to you all. It is in there if you want to see it. We did want to be transparent about how we got these ratings. I will focus on, for a moment, for those business dot sizes, here's a breakdown of the industries. So like the big consumers, healthcare, education, IT, banking, they tend to be the hardest core bandwidth users. When you get down in the middle, you're looking at like publishing, hotels, things like that. Down at the lowest end, you're looking at like manufacturer, like textile, contractors, mining, farming, believe it or not, needs broadband. Dairy farms these days, a lot of their milking equipment is all cloud-based. It's managed remotely. Same thing, a lot of times you'll have tractors that are using a wireless connection to like track what they're doing and how they're handling the field. So like even something that you think of as a very old school traditional technology that is not digital, digital's starting to get there too. So they need connectivity as well. Breakdown of how we estimated our costs and our distances. I went over that with the slides here, so again, I'm not going to read this to you, but it's there in detail if you want to look at it later. Got a simplified version of that historical chart. This chart's really useful when you're making pitches to funding agencies to explain why you want to build something that's got extra capacity. Because sometimes they're looking like lowest bid, or how cheap can you do it? We're like, okay, we'll do it as cheap as we can, but keep in mind it's got to last for 30 years. And then just a breakdown on how we did the math for the budget. I will be happy to take any questions. Oh, I did want to mention, like when I was talking about how fixed wireless tops out, I was talking with the guys from SmartWay here before the meeting, and they're deploying brand new technology that has got significantly more capacity than that. So things are looking up for fixed wireless, that it'll be more than just like that immediate short-term fix. Like it's got some legs now. And as is typical technology, once you get it out there, people start jumping on board. But I'll be happy to entertain questions both online and in the room. Yeah.
So, Sean, so just for layman, what is the need in broadband to a home? I got a mother and father watching 2 different TVs, 1080p. I got a kid in the room doing gaming on a PS5, and I got a daughter that's FaceTime your friends on the home Wi-Fi. How much bandwidth is necessary in that home for that usage?
Typically, if you're pulling down, like if you want to have it with the gaming to be really good performance, you probably want it in the 100 megabit range. You can get away with less. I can survive. Like I live out in the digital divide myself, and I'm stuck on an LTE modem, like essentially a SIM card with a router that's talking to a cell tower. And on a good day, I get 5 megabits, and I'm able to Zoom with people, and it feels okay. And they always tell me, yeah, everything's fine. But like I did a TV interview over Zoom once from there, and when I saw the interview after the fact, watching it on the news, I could hear the poor quality. Like my voice was all artifacts, sound artifacts, and then kind of verbally. You could see me, like the video was okay, but so like, and that was just me doing that by myself. So when you've got multiple users, yeah, you're looking at, you probably want in that 50 to 100 range at minimum.
So I guess I would challenge
You would challenge that?
Because I see this study is based on 2 false premises. One is the amount of bandwidth that's required.
Mm-hmm.
I think to the layman, they hear I need 100 meg. I've had 100 meg from Spectrum in South Akron for 2 years, and the most I've ever got in the middle of the night was about 60.
Mm-hmm.
More often than not, I get 15 to 25, and that's plenty. I mean, and we get 4, sometimes 6 people banging on it. So I question, so when you build that, and then you project that out, it starts to suggest a narrative, which is the second premise that I would challenge, that only fiber can do that.
Mm-hmm.
And so while that helps a lot of people and a lot of narrative from pretty hefty lobbyist groups, it doesn't really address the real issue. In Tuscarawas County, I believe our issue is rural broadband to the home. And what do you really need to get rural broadband to the home? And how many technologies can do that? There's so much money being plowed into it. Has to be a fiber solution that I just seriously question where that's all going. Because we've already been there.
Yeah.
I mean, you and Tom did the study, and
Yeah.
we sat with Tom, and he says, oh yeah, there's been hundreds of millions of dollars, and nobody can account for where it went. we're in the process of doing the same thing again, expecting a different result. I just worry that there's a lot of money involved, and it's just gonna get corrupted real quick.
There is that risk. I'm optimistic about the Ohio program, like the money that goes through them. I think they're gonna hold providers much more accountable, and I think we'll see real results from them. I'm not optimistic like the FCC does the second round of RDOF. They're gonna have the same sort of marshmallow enforcement on it. And you have a perfectly valid point about, especially now that new wireless technology is out there that can handle higher speeds. And yeah, it may not be that tenfold, 10 years, it may start to flatten out, and you might end up just needing 10 gig or something 30 years from now.
But that's my point. When you project it like that, then it all of a sudden is, well, it has to be
It
fiber.
has to be, yeah.
But the other thing that's the challenge is that second premise is that you're totally ignoring the new technologies that might come out. A year ago, we weren't aware of this technology
Right.
that Ryan was talking to you about, and that's just a year.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden now it's competing with cable and plus, faster than cable. So what about compression technologies that all of a sudden, now you don't need 100 to the home with compression technologies, you need 40 or
Yeah.
30. I think it totally ignores new technology leaps that are going to happen in the future, which are going to take that curve and just totally throw that out of whack.
Yeah, as those technologies come in, we need to revise our projections. And yeah, I will grant you that point. Like, we had to make a decision. It's like, okay, we're going to look at what there is right now, and yeah, there are technology tends to leap in parallel with, like, the demand and the technology tend to go together. But like we're like, okay, if people were going to throw the money right now, what would they do? And like already, like, fixed wireless is looking better now than it did a year ago or 6 months ago. So yeah, we'll be.
Well, the Broadband Ohio stuff that got sent out, that's $8,600 a home that they're going to supposedly serve. And that's just, the 230 million went to 10 different companies, that's it. So you're counting on those 10 companies to be good stewards of that 230 million. I certainly hope that Broadband Ohio does a better job than anybody's ever done in the past.
Yeah.
Call me a cynic.
Well,
I don't blame you.
I would add on to what Mike is saying, because Sean, we've seen this presentation numerous times, and when Tom did it, and when we saw it in Columbus, we had the same type of concerns that you're talking about, Mike. We have areas that's all hilly, and there could be a combination of fiber, combination of wireless. But my concern has always been, and I said from the beginning, because there was no accountability the last time, that I think Broadband Ohio creation was great. It was funded with $250 million. But the projection, it's going to take $2.5 to $3 billion to be able to connect all of Ohio. And if we're going to do that, there's funding there to do it. If you took all the funding sources that come from the federal, the state, and the local, that combined and would funnel that into an organization like Broadband Ohio, and I saw that, I guess I had a question on the other part where some more funding was going to be put into there, because I did have a conversation with Peter Rodenberg, because we didn't get any funding from the first round, but it needs to be held accountable in a way that we don't make the same mistake that was made before, that we lose all this money, billions of dollars that was spent, and we still aren't connected. In order for Ohio to move forward, and particularly the younger people that are coming up now to do business with telehealth, agriculture. We've seen presentations on agriculture where they were running things through the field that looked like something from Star Wars. But everything was ran off of that need for bandwidth. But I would agree with Mike, and that's my biggest concern, that we're going to spend a lot of money if somebody isn't held accountable for it, and that we're going to be in the same place that we were before. But we have the funding. We need the mechanism in place, and I think it's going to be a combination of the new technology, wireless, hardwire, all those different things, but that's way above my pay grade. So we rely on people that are experts in the field to tell us how to do this, but it really has to have a watchdog to make sure that it is accomplished this time around.
Yep. Yeah, you're handing me my point there, because I completely would agree with you. One of the things we need to do now is focus on that accountability, is making sure that there are ways to show that yes, the work really happened. We should be pushed. One thing that you can advocate for I think effectively is talk to Peter and just keep saying, make sure the state re-ups its UCLA license, that they continue to get the speed test data. Like, okay, we had a nice mapping thing that now showed where there was the need so that they could identify where to give the funding. We'll keep checking that area because as these build-outs happen, those test results are gonna change. They could even encourage the providers, it's like when you upgrade people, you tell them, run this speed test.
Well, they have a new group that's going to be created, and actually Marla is going to be heading that up with our economic development. It's going to have a local team that's going to have continual conversations for over, I think, the next 15 weeks or something like that with Broadband Ohio. And I think they're going out all across the state, and that really needs to happen. But again, there has to be accountability when the funding is there, and I think that if they're going to use Broadband Ohio as the watchdog, they're way underfunded. When you're talking about it's going to take $2.5 to $3 billion to connect all of Ohio, the first pot of money that was put in was $250 million, which is great. I'm glad that they're doing something. But when you look at all the different pots of money that's out there, we're well over $2.5 to $3 billion. So there really should be no excuse for us to be able to get Ohio connected this time around. Whatever technology it takes.
I have two comments. As far as the bandwidth chart, just kind of to address this point, the average home in America uses less than 5 megabits per second on average right now, which is, so if you're looking at the averages of usage versus what your expected usage is, they're a total mismatch.
Yeah, they are different.
But also, most cable companies have a soft cap of 1,000 gigs of usage, a terabyte. In a month. It takes less than 6 megabits per second to hit that cap if you use it throughout the month. So having a gig or 10 gigs at your home, but having soft caps
Have
that
a
are
company that throttles it. Yeah.
exactly is effectively, there's no point buying a Ferrari and taking it out on old 250. And the other thing that I'd like to note is the broadband maps with using the UCLA speed test data. I challenge that just a little bit because, for instance, my rural farmers are buying a 15 meg plan from me, but I have 100 meg at their door. So you're using data on what they buy, not on what's deployed. So if you fund somebody's deployment, but I'm already there, you've wasted money. And that's my view.
Have you been able to challenge successfully?
We've been challenging with Broadband Ohio. There's a few addresses. There's some. Chris can attest to some of the service deployments. The cable company claims they serve his home, and I'm the only provider there. And so that's kind of a
part of the challenge. Like I really am glad you're bringing these points up because this is a complicated topic. And one of the challenges when you try to map it is exactly like what you're saying. Like folks opt into a lower package, but then it's how do you prove that the higher package is there? It depends on the companies. Like when I've talked to you guys are a lot more open with us than many of the others. They often just say trade secret. We're not going to tell you what we offer. And so there's no way to map it out unless
And that's exactly what happened last time. They showed with lack of better terms, a 5-acre area that's a geographical tract, and one house is served at the edge of that. They're saying that whole tract is served. That's very inaccurate and was misleading and due to whoever paid for all the funding at the last time.
And we are totally open to revising our mapping methodology. Like it's not like we're going to say line in the sand. This is right.
Well, the FCC is going to be helping in June. They're changing reporting requirements from ISPs. They're going from old-fashioned where it was based on the census tracts, like what you're dealing with, and now they're going to. We have to actually report every rooftop. We have to give a list of addresses, every rooftop that we can touch, and there's certain requirements, height over the rooftop and things. So we can't be like, well, I can see everything if you put a 50-foot antenna in the backyard, So they're changing that in June. So that's going to make the real picture come out. The problem is everybody lags, the FCC especially lags 18 months behind. So all of these decisions are being made today, but reporting requirements are changing next month. So it's kind of.
Yeah, we ran into that with a provider up near Troy where, like, we mapped them. They showed as fairly uncertain. They're like, you've got fiber to the home in that area, and we're like, well, your Form 477 data from the FCC says you have DSL, and they're like, oh, and it's like, and we found out that like that form wasn't going to show up in the public records for another year, and we were able to adjust their mapping results based on the space they gave, like a polygon they gave us, but yeah, it's,
Yeah.
I saw the FCC's even doing their own speed test app now. They've got it out on the,
That's been fun.
other questions, comments?
So what are people doing now, Sean? You're going around to the different Omega counties, 85 million to do Tuscarawas County. I mean, what do you expect the counties to do with that information? Are we supposed to go work with Broadband Ohio? Are we supposed to be applying somewhere for federal grants for 85 million to, well, 60-some million, whatever, when somebody
Yeah.
kicks in? What is the purpose of these meetings?
At the county
What's
level-
the call to action?
Yeah, at the county level, like, if you're looking at it for the entire county, we want to be able to arm the commissioners and the economic development folks with these numbers so that they've got something that they can show if they're talking to a funded agency of like, this is how the challenge we're facing. The other thing we're looking at doing, like, once Broadband Ohio publishes their coverage maps, now it won't affect Tuscarawas because there wasn't anything awarded this round. But essentially, we're gonna do an adjusted version of this that narrows that budget down, saying, okay, let's assume Charter does their RDOF commitment. And let's assume that, like, if there are power grants provided, we'll just remove those and we'll bring it down. And so that $65 million tag may drop down to 15 or something. One of the main things I'm hoping counties will do, and we'll provide a web map for this so that it's easier to do, because this is kind of hard, if you're having to, I'm not supposed to sleep. Trying to scroll back and forth or flip like on the printed page, if you're trying to flip between maps, like from unserved roads to the businesses to the speeds, that's hard to do. So we're going to provide a web map version that Jeanette's folks will have to log into. They'll share with all the counties. Be able to log in and turn the layers on and off and superimpose whichever ones you want, change how transparent they are so you can see things on top of each other. And then zoom in on areas and say, okay, this looks like decent residential distribution here, we got some businesses, let's focus on this, and that, instead of being a $65 million project, might be a $2 million project. Or they might be able to propose, like, and then we look at the topography and say, well, this is a perfect place to get, if we put a tower over here, we can get wireless into 80% of those homes.
Can we overlay that with our GIS mapping system here in the county?
Yeah, we can get you layers. Yeah, not all counties have a solid GIS department or the ability to do it. So if you all can do that, we can get you.
Yeah, and like really to your point, we want this to be a planning tool. And so if Marla and her team identify a particular area that would be great for business development, does it make more sense to have fiber to that area? Whereas, on a planning basis, as Sean indicated, this is primarily residential. Let's look at some of the newer fixed wireless technologies and what does it cost to serve fixed wireless. So we want this to be a planning tool for the county and the economic development professionals to make some informed decisions. And I think, based upon your comments, ultimately we're gonna have a report prepared. And I think we will need to have a section to address the newer technologies. So.
Yeah, I'm not, don't misunderstand. We have a bias and we have an interest that we're trying to protect. But, the bottom line for Tuscarawas County is you have a ton of people that are underserved. And the solution that I'm worried about that I see, just like we've seen in the past, is you just throw a boatload of money at a whole bunch of big companies that claim they're going to do it. And then all of a sudden the money disappears. Nobody knows where it went. They throw a ton of attorneys at it. They point to a line item in the contract that is, a bit vague, and everyone just walks away. And meanwhile, hundreds of millions of dollars is just gone. And this is more money than they've done in the past. You're talking a hell of a lot more money. And I think that, I'm, again, a cynic. I think it's very concerning of how that's going to happen, and I think the good stuff that could happen in Tuscarawas County is just going to go by the wayside. All that money is going to get blown, and we're sitting here trying to do a good thing, and we can't seem to get anything done.
And I think that's one thing, hopefully our report, when it's finalized, and, the folks will have an opportunity to comment on that too, that's something that we can highlight too. I think, as Sean mentioned, the work that's being done by Ohio TT in Coshocton County. I think that's very positive. It's not gonna be a one-size-fixes all. I think we have to look at a variety, and in the most remote areas, you know, the new technology that Kennedy has at her home, Starlink.
Yeah.
You know, that, if you have 3 houses in a mile, maybe Starlink makes the most sense, provided
Yeah,
they
Bill
have.
Johnson mentioned that when he was here. I think he kind of overblew it, but, you know, it's an option.
Right, it
But
has to be
I
a
would-
variety of
I would
technology.
watch Ohio TT and Coshocton. Everything he showed was all projected. They haven't done anything.
They've actually started their deployments, and I know,
They built a tower.
I don't know if they've built the tower
Did
yet,
they
but
build a tower, or did they put one on an existing?
they put one on an existing asset, vertical asset.
Yeah, they're on the.
And I know Dairy Farm in Coshocton County is extremely happy right now because they have access to reliable broadband.
That is the tough thing though, like
I'm just saying, just
promising the
watch that.
world and deliver, and, you know, do they deliver? I was just, like, and there's risk with that, like, it was in Harrison County. There's a wireless, fixed wireless provider there that just pulled the plug on, like, their investor backed out after they had started deploying, and the investor decided that he wasn't seeing enough return, I guess, and just said, I'm just not paying the bill, sorry. And actually, there were people in the room who were like, my internet went off yesterday. What do we do? And like, just gotta go through.
We're overbuilding that footprint to pick those people up right now. Better than the Imperial War.
Imperial, yeah, yeah.
Where we're overbuilding that right now to pick those all.
Glad to hear that for those folks' sake.
Sean, can you tell us more about Broadband Ohio? Who is that?
So
And,
yeah.
you know, I'm concerned as Mike and Commissioner Hobby about who's holding the purse strings here.
Yeah.
And, you know, our access to the money.
They're a state agency that was set up there. I think they officially report to the Lieutenant Governor through Innovate Ohio. But their charter is to manage deploying broadband throughout Ohio.
Are these state employees or are there representatives from private?
They're state
companies?
employees.
Okay.
Yeah, they're not, it's not one of these where you set up a, you know, here's the chicken house and let's have Fox take charge.
Right.
Peter Voderberg is the director. I remember Tom was talking about the first time he met Peter, and he came in armed with all of this background data because he was used to political appointees in broadband knowing nothing about any of the technology or the situation. And he was starting to go through that, and Peter's like, yeah, and he started telling him what all the points he was going to make. He's like, oh, this guy knows his stuff. So Peter's got a background in the technology and in the situation, and I've been impressed every time I've talked with him. He's very proactive. He's got another guy, Patrick, I can't remember his last name.
Patrick Smith.
Smith, thank you, yeah. Amy Elbor does a lot of their coordination. They've got a communications person. I think there might be a staff of like 5 or 6 at most. So it's a small office, so then that's why I'm doubly impressed with how much stuff they've gotten done with as few people as they have currently.
Mm-hmm.
Their philosophy, and of course, I guess you have to take it when they tell you this, but I feel like I'm seeing evidence that backs this up, is that they know that the shenanigans that the big companies play, and they're doing their best to structure this program so that they can spot when that starts to happen and prevent it. And who knows, I could be made a fool and end up saying, no, Sean, you took, you just, it's the same old, but I don't feel like that is. I trust Broadband Ohio as an office. I think they're going to handle this money differently certainly than the feds have. The FCC, the mid-level people, the technical people who deal with the FCC are really good, but it's a revolving door of large company executives who have stepped away from their jobs, and then they get appointed as a chair, and they're essentially, so at that level, essentially the FCC behaves like an advocacy agency for the companies that they're supposed to be regulating. That's why that $100 billion has vanished.
And I think just from some meetings that I've been at too, this is a priority for the governor and his administration and the lieutenant governor. And I think they want to make sure that the money is well spent, that it goes to the areas that services actually provided. I just get the impression that's a very high priority for the administration.
And I would agree with that. I mean, I've had several conversations with him. He's very accessible, and also with Patrick. But the thing is, I'll go back to, they get $250 million, which is really a spit in the bucket. And the money the other amount of money that's coming from all the different sources, all have strings attached to them. And that's why we didn't qualify the last time we didn't receive any funding through one of them. Through Broadband Ohio, on that one, which we may get another round. And you showed that there's going to be more funding put into there. So I would agree that the money that they're watchdogging, they're trying to make sure that things are done correctly. But there's all this other money that's out here that we have providers that can do some of the areas that need to be done that are not getting any funding either. And if we don't get somebody watching all of that funding, it's still going to be the same situation we talked about before. We do have good providers in the county that can do other things, but they're not getting any assistance to do it. And it has to be, in my mind, it has to be like the electric. It has to be the top priority. Unless we're going to be left behind if we do not get the connections and we don't make sure that all the households are connected. And we're an agricultural state. I mean, we talk about agriculture. Not only Tuscarawas County, but the whole state's an agricultural state. If we don't get the broadband out to the areas that really need it, we're going to be left behind.
For sure.
And I think Broadband Ohio, again, in my experience in dealing with Peter and Patrick and different meetings, they're open to other technologies. In fact, some of the presentations that Peter has done, it's a number of different technologies that have been deployed in areas specific to, that meets that cost-effective need of that particular area to address just what you've been saying.
And I'm with you, and then I hope that this is the real deal. But here's some data points that I have. One is, where was any notification of any of that funding for the initial go-around? And how do we get contacted for that? Never got contacted. Secondly, there's supposedly a whole bunch of open public meetings which never get broadcast on their website. Go to their website now and find out when the next public meeting is. You only find out after the meeting and the minutes are posted. That just, it's a second red flag for me. And the third is, in the community that Ryan runs in, the national convention, has a different perspective of how this is being deployed in Ohio. They said it's a cesspool of lawsuits that's coming because it was forced into place. Money was granted to selected people that were already pre-selected. It appears, and it's to the same people that they gave a bunch of money to before and didn't do what they said they were going to do. So I'm hopeful that this Peter's the real deal and he's really going to monitor this. But as good as he may be, this is a monstrous effort, and we'll see.
To follow up Mike's point, when I was in the national convention in New Orleans, we had 2 conferences a year for our industry. We had a focus, an entire 12-hour day around government regulation and funding and things, real ribbon and stuff. And they started going state by state. And when they got to Ohio, they asked who was from Ohio, and they pulled all of us aside. And the statement basically was, watch out. And I kind of was very concerned because they didn't do that with any of the other states. And there was the opinion from several of the basically industry watchdogs and things like that was that Ohio was fumbling a large percentage of what they were doing, and that we were going to be a lawsuit hotbed. And it wasn't just going to take down the perpetrators, but it was going to be something that everyone was going to get drug into a room and basically beat. So everyone at the conference that was from Ohio, we've all looked at each other. Actually, I've gotten 3 messages from people that are sitting in similar meetings to this today, asking me opinions on things, and it's around the fact that there's a lot of, basically the small guys are getting shut out, but the small guys have a voice in certain areas, and it's a big concern in this state, so.
So here's the issue though for us, sorry, Dr. Van So the issue is, do we as a small company jump in and deploy things that we know can help this community at the risk of taking money that we're gonna get drug into a lawsuit in the future? And you know, you're almost to the point where like, you know, we don't want to be a part of this, because although we have technology that we know could work for rural communities, is that putting us in the crosshairs when things start to blow up? And that's what's very concerning. You know, the stuff he brought back from the convention. We're like, all right, maybe we just tap out, we just do our thing and let this go where it goes and watch the fireworks 3, 4, 5 years from now. That's the shame of it, in my opinion.
So Mike,
Van Epps,
You know, you gotta get this guy.
He's patiently waiting.
Ted, I just have one question for you, Mike. So, as a regional planning organization, what can we do to help you?
It's not, you know, I don't wanna make this about us, I'm just
No,
trying to give you a
no.
picture of what we're seeing.
Right.
I think as a regional planning, we have to look at all the technologies and all the things that can help make sure we're protecting ourselves, because if Marla's group ends up putting together a hell of a proposal, and we got $10 million coming from Broadband Ohio, this whole thing blows up. Marla, Economic Development, Tuscarawas County, and anyone they were working with is now sitting in the courtroom trying to explain how what they did was legit. And we don't have any appetite for that.
I think the state and federal legislation is something that the region can really keep hammering on, because my past state, we had really good watchdog systems in place to assist the providers to be accountable. And that's missing sauce here.
Yeah, and I'm not poo-pooing anything you guys do, because this is good stuff that can help. This is the stuff that good people are trying to do good things, but it's all inside of a structure that is in question.
The mapping system would be very helpful for us to decide the deployment of all the different types. Because I was just high level, and I was looking at the map and going, okay, could we connect this? Go back.
Sure.
First minute.
Where the middle mile is map. I mean, you know, is there, to Mike's point, multiple ways that we overlay some things with middle mile, fixed, you know, we have different satellites, you know, we really think about each township and, you know, think, what's the best way? That's something, Jeanette, that I think the region could really look at, and your team.
Yep.
I mean, you're not gonna do middle mile down in the southern part of the county probably, because you can't connect it with anything. And since traffic's
Unless you've
there,
got towers that, like, that
Unless-
facilitate
exactly.
towers.
is that,
Yeah,
and-
there is middle mile, like earmarked middle mile money still out there.
But to Mike's point, when we go after that, when it's this legislation and providers are just, are they spending the money where they're saying they are?
I wish I had a good answer.
I know, none of us do.
Dr. Van Epps?
You've been very patient.
Yes, Sean, in the literature review for your report, are you gonna have any sections on public broadband networks in Ohio and elsewhere?
We were not looking specifically, are they talking like municipal operations,
In county,
like in towns and things?
yes.
That was not part of the scope of the report, so there won't be that in there. That's something we can consider for future.
Okay, so the discussion today was on middle mile.
Last mile.
Okay, well, last mile includes.
Last mile can be municipal, yeah.
Yes, so that's why I'm asking if you would maybe consider putting that in, because, you know, we've got examples in northeast Ohio, like Medina County doing their network, Fairlawn, Hudson, even Dover has a system here. In the Fairlawn system, they're gonna offer 2 gigabits up and down to all residents for $45 a month. And they have a 100 gigabit backhaul from Fairlawn going up to Cleveland. They can increase that to 400 gig with the connection. So that's how they're getting such cheap rates.
Yep.
Okay, because they're connecting to the transnational backbone. Now in Tuscarawas County, I don't think on your map here, you're showing the one backbone that we do have. And it's on the rail line that goes through Beach City and Sugar Creek on its way to Columbus, and the other way it goes up to Cleveland.
We don't have the intercity, like the intercity big backbones in there, like, this is a regional, like, county level middle mile.
Right. I think you need to show those, because then you need to tap those, so you can exploit the hundreds of gigabits that are flowing through there like the Autobahn without an exit here. That's half our problem. The transnational backbones are not in this region, especially in southeast Ohio. They're all up in northeast Ohio on their way to Chicago. So part of my 774-page dissertation on this was to try and get fiber from the north down here.
Bring it down through this area, so you've
Yes,
got the back.
that's half the problem, okay? So if they're not gonna build through here, we have to build to them. And that's what Fairlawn did. They leased the line, they got up to Cleveland, that's how they're getting their 100 gig with an option for 400 gig. Okay? I would hope that you would discuss that. The other item was financing. We're looking at the ARPA funds that came in. And I had meetings with Summit County Port Authority Director Christopher Burnham and Portage County Port Authority Director Bradford Earhart. And I said, with all the ARPA coming into the counties and the cities up there, would you consider using that as collateral to issue revenue bonds to get maybe 5-10 times more money? And then you'll get that money back and use that to build out your middle mile and regional systems. And the response from them was, in theory, yes. We'd like to see more information on how you're going to guarantee this is paid back. But now we're talking big money. Big money, enough to pay for the system that you're proposing here.
Yeah.
And that was buried, that we were proposing up there. So that's what I would like to see included in the report, is an additional financing option of collateralizing revenue bonds. Because that's how Fairlawn was built. $10 million issued by Summit County Port Authority. And they paid back through the year 27 on a 30-year bond already after 5 years. It works.
Yeah.
It works.
Great point.
That's what I got.
Thank you.
Is there further reports coming, Sean, on this?
We will be doing.
That's the question I got on my soapbox, I apologize. But, so data, more data to help, the mapping would help, and looking at and watching some of the things that are out there already. I mentioned Ohio TT, you have one opinion, I have another. Just watch it, and I hope I'm wrong. And be maybe a bit of that watchdog to help us stay out of trouble, as if this is an area of grant funding that is a little gray, then let's avoid that, folks. Let's go over here, this is solid, this is real. You know, help us, direct us where we should be going.
Yeah, the layout of all the different grants, that makes sense for the Omega region, because some of them might not.
Yeah, and I think that's something that will be addressed in the report is a summary of the grant funds. And I mentioned, you know, hopefully we just worked with Carroll County. We'll know in September if that's approved with the ARC funding. But I think those funds are pretty solid. ARC does require performance measures and documentation that the funds are expended as they were intended to.
Yeah, so in detail, to answer your question, materials that are still coming, the interactive map for planning purposes, and then we're going to be doing a Omega district-wide report that has all of this in it.
Do you expect to refresh this every year, or is
We'd
that
like
to be
to.
determined?
We'd like to be able to.
Yeah, and actually right now we're discussing with Reid Consulting how we can continue their services. And that's with all of the local development districts that serve the 32 county Appalachian region, so that we can keep this information fresh. Because I think it's absolutely imperative that we get this right, that we do know that the systems are in place so that the money is expended as it was intended to be expended. Because otherwise, we're going to be back in the same place that we are now.
I'll close this up. I want to thank Omega for organizing this and putting this all together. Thank you and your company for the work that you've done on this. We wouldn't have this conversation if this wasn't all put together. So it's good to have a conversation and hopefully move forward in a positive way. So I appreciate the work that Omega has done and your Reid Consulting.
Thank you.
Really appreciate your comments. If, for those of you that haven't made any comments, if you think of something afterwards, please feel free to reach out to us. I can, grab a card from either Kennedy, myself, or Hannah Stillions. We appreciate any comments. If you want to watch on YouTube, we'll send out that link and, respond.